the blood-red dust of Colorado City. Texas settled on Harriet Zeller's skirts as she stepped off the stagecoach in the sweltering summer of 1875. With nothing but a carpetbag clutched in her trembling hands and the whispers of lunatic trailing behind her like ghosts, she faced the frontier town that would either be her salvation or her final undoing. "You sure this is where you want to be, miss?" The stagecoach driver eyed her warily, as if her supposed madness might be catching. "Ain't much here for a lady on her own." "I'm quite certain," Harriet replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. At 23, she'd already endured more than most women twice her age, including a month in Philadelphia's notorious Kirkbride Asylum, where speaking one's mind was considered a symptom of female hysteria. The driver shrugged, tossing her second bag down before climbing back up to his seat. "Suit yourself. Hotel's down that way." He pointed with his whip before snapping it above his horses, leaving Harriet in a cloud of dust and uncertainty. Colorado City had sprung up like a stubborn weed in the harsh West Texas landscape, sustained by the promise of the Texas and Pacific Railway. What had once been a humble trading post was now a growing town of wooden buildings, saloons, and opportunity, or so she hoped. Harriet adjusted her faded bluebonnet and lifted her chin. This town knew nothing of her past, nothing of Dr. Emerson's proclamation that her excessive reading and dangerous opinions had rendered her unfit for society. Here, she could start anew. The Western Hotel stood 3 stories tall, its facade freshly painted despite the surrounding establishment's weathered appearance. Inside, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose barely looked up from his ledger. "Room for one night," Harriet said, placing a carefully counted sum on the desk. The clerk eyed her curiously. "Traveling alone, miss?" "Yes." Harriet kept her answer clipped, having learned that elaboration often led to trouble. "We don't get many unaccompanied ladies," he commented, sliding a key across the desk. "Second floor, room 4. Dining room serves supper at 6. Harriet nodded her thanks and climbed the stairs, her legs aching from the long journey. The room was sparse but clean: a narrow bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the dusty Main Street. She set her bags down and sank onto the bed, the weight of exhaustion and uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. Her freedom had come at a steep price. After her father's death 6 months ago, her brother-in-law had wasted no time having her committed when she'd objected to his mismanagement of her father's estate. "For your own good," he'd said, as the asylum attendants had dragged her away. Only her childhood friend Mary's husband, a lawyer with considerable influence, had managed to secure her release on the condition that she leave Philadelphia for good. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss, you wanted to know about employment opportunities." The hotel clerk stood in the hallway, a folded newspaper in his hand. Harriet didn't recall mentioning employment, but she nodded gratefully. "Yes, thank you. Mitchell's General Store is looking for help, and there's the schoolhouse, though they usually want married ladies." He handed her the newspaper. "Good luck to you." Harriet closed the door and spread the paper on the bed. The Mitchells' advertisement seemed promising. With renewed hope, she splashed water on her face and changed her travel-worn dress for her second-best blue calico before venturing back onto the street. The general store sat at the corner of Main Street and Oak, its windows displaying everything from farm implements to bolts of fabric. A bell tinkled as she entered, and the scent of coffee, leather, and spices enveloped her. "Be right with you," called a voice from the back. Harriet waited, her fingers trailing over a display of embroidery threads. When the proprietor emerged, she straightened her spine. "Mr. Mitchell." I've come about the position advertised in the paper." Edgar Mitchell, a balding man with friendly eyes, seemed taken aback. "You're interested in clerking at the general store?" "I am. I can read, write, and calculate figures quickly. I maintained my father's household accounts for years." The storekeeper's smile turned apologetic. "Well, miss, I was really looking for a young man. The work involves heavy lifting, you see, and dealing with all sorts of customers. Not really suitable for a lady." "I'm stronger than I look," Harriet insisted, "and I've dealt with all manner of people." "I'm sure you have, but," Mitchell shook his head, "my wife wouldn't approve. A woman's place is in the home, after all." The familiar dismissal stung, but Harriet had expected it. She thanked him politely and turned to leave. "If you're looking for work, maybe try the Harvey house when it opens next month," he called after her. "They hire women as waitresses." Outside, the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Harriet fought back tears of frustration as she continued down the street, stopping at every business that might hire a woman. The dress shop already had help. The hotel dining room had 2 waitresses. The newspaper didn't need a typesetter. By sunset, her feet ached and her spirits had sunk lower than the setting sun. She had enough money to last 3 weeks at most, and then what? The saloon doors across the street swung open, spilling light and raucous laughter into the gathering dusk. A tall figure in a worn leather vest and dusty hat emerged, pausing to light a cigarette. Even from a distance, something about his relaxed stance and confident posture caught her attention. As she watched, 2 men approached him, their body language hostile. Though she couldn't hear their words, the confrontation was clear. The tall man didn't flinch or back away, merely dropping his cigarette and grinding it under his boot heel. Whatever he said made the other men hesitate, then retreat back into the saloon. Harriet realized she'd been staring when the man turned, his gaze meeting hers across the street. Embarrassed, she quickened her pace toward the hotel. "Miss, hold up a minute," she shouldn't stop. A respectable woman didn't speak to strange men on the street, especially as night fell. But something in his voice, a note of genuine concern rather than mockery, made her pause. The man crossed the street with long, easy strides. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 28, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Pardon my forwardness," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. "Name's Flynn Irwin. Couldn't help noticing you going in and out of every business on Main Street today. Looking for work." Harriet hesitated. "Yes, without much success, I'm afraid. New in town." She nodded, surprised by his directness. "Thought so. Colorado City's growing, but it's still set in its ways." He studied her for a moment. "Can you cook?" Yes, reasonably well. My ranch needs a cook. Last one left to marry a shopkeeper in Sweetwater." He gestured vaguely westward. "Pays fair, includes room and board. You'd have your own cabin, small but decent." Harriet stared at him, suspicious. "You're offering me a job just like that. You don't know anything about me." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I know you're determined. Walked all day in this heat, didn't give up. That says something about character." The smile faded. "Look, I run a legitimate cattle operation outside town with my foreman and 5 hands. We're not savages, just hungry men tired of burning beans and bacon. If you're interested, my wagon leaves at 8 tomorrow morning." "Mr. Irwin, I think about it," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "No pressure. I'll be loading supplies at Mitchell's if you decide you want the position." With a nod, he continued down the street. Harriet watched him go, conflicted. Working on a ranch, miles from town, surrounded by men she didn't know, it sounded dangerous, improper, and exactly the kind of situation her sister would warn against. But it was also a job, a place to live, a chance. That night, she barely slept, weighing her options as the hours crawled by. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She dressed carefully in her sturdiest dress, packed her meager belongings, and walked to Mitchell's general store just as the town was coming to life. Flynn Irwin was loading sacks of flour and coffee into a wagon when she approached. He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Mr. Irwin," she said before she could lose her courage, "I accept your offer with conditions." His eyebrows rose. "And what might those be?" "I want a written agreement stating my wages and duties. I want Sundays free to attend church, and I want your word as a gentleman that I'll be treated with respect." For a moment he just looked at her, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Miss Zeller, Harriet Zeller." "Miss Zeller, you drive a hard bargain before you've even cooked a single meal." He extended his hand. "But I agree to your terms, and I give you my word, no one at the Double Creek Ranch will disrespect you." Harriet hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful. "Let's get your things," he said. "We've got a 2-hour drive ahead." As they left Colorado City behind, the landscape opened up into rolling grasslands dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. Flynn kept the horses at an easy pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or telling her about the ranch. "Been running Double Creek for 5 years now," he explained. "Inherited it from my uncle. It's not the biggest spread in Texas, but the land is good, and we're building up a decent herd of Herefords." "You're from Texas originally?" Harriet asked, finding herself curious about this man who'd offered her employment with so little hesitation. "Born in Virginia, came west after the war." "Wanted something different," he glanced at her. "What about you? What brings a lady like yourself to this dusty corner of nowhere?" Harriet tensed. "I needed a fresh start." Flynn nodded, not pressing further. "Don't we all?" The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. The rhythmic creaking of the wagon and the distant call of a hawk filled the space between them. Harriet found herself relaxing, watching the landscape unfold around them. "There it is," Flynn said eventually, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. A creek lined with cottonwoods snaked past the structures, and cattle dotted the surrounding pastures. The ranch house itself was more substantial than Harriet had expected, a 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several smaller cabins and outbuildings surrounded it, along with corrals and a large barn. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, followed by a large black and white dog that bounded toward the wagon. "That's Henry, my foreman," Flynn explained. "Been with me since I bought the place." "Dog's named Scout. He's friendly, just loud." The dog circled the wagon, barking joyfully as they pulled up in front of the main house. Flynn set the brake and jumped down, then offered Harriet his hand to help her descend. "Boss," Henry greeted, his gaze shifting curiously to Harriet. He was older, perhaps 50, with graying hair and a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and wind. "This our new cook, Henry. Meet Miss Harriet Zeller. Miss Zeller, this is Henry Blackburn, best cattleman in 3 counties." Henry touched his hat. "Madam, welcome to Double Creek." "Thank you," Harriet replied, relieved by the man's respectful manner. "Let's get you settled," Flynn said. "Your cabin's just over there." The cabin was small but clean, with a bed, chest of drawers, table, and chair. A braided rug covered part of the plank floor, and curtains framed the single window. "It's not fancy," Flynn said, setting her bags inside the door, "but it's private. There's a lock on the door, and no one will bother you here." "It's perfectly adequate," Harriet assured him, touched by the consideration shown in the fresh bedding and the vase of wildflowers on the table. "Cookhouse is the big building next to the main house. It's got a good stove and a decent pantry." We just stocked up in town, so you should have everything you need." He hesitated. "We usually eat at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. But if you need time to get settled, I'll have supper ready at 6, Harriet interrupted, eager to prove her worth. Flynn's smile was warm. "Thank you, Miss Zeller. I have a feeling Double Creek just got a whole lot better." After he left, Harriet stood in the center of her cabin, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she'd stepped off a stagecoach with no prospects and dwindling funds. Now she had employment, a roof over her head, and a man who treated her with more respect in a few hours than her brother-in-law had shown in years. It wouldn't be easy, cooking for a ranch full of men. But for the first time since her father's death, Harriet felt something like hope fluttering in her chest. She unpacked quickly, then made her way to the cookhouse. The kitchen was well equipped, with a large iron stove, work tables, and shelves stocked with staples. The dining area held a long table that could seat at least 10, with benches on either side and a chair at each end. Harriet rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time the dinner bell rang at 6, she had prepared a hearty beef stew, cornbread, and apple cobbler for dessert. The ranch hands filed in, their curious glances turning to appreciative smiles as they saw the spread. Flynn took the seat at the head of the table, gesturing for Harriet to take the chair at the opposite end. "Miss Zeller, these hungry wolves are Ethan, James, Will, Toby, and Charlie," Flynn introduced. "Boys, this is Miss Zeller, our new cook. You'll treat her with the same respect you'd show your own mothers, or you'll answer to me." A chorus of "Yes, boss," and "Pleased to meet you, madam," followed. They were a varied bunch, Ethan tall and lanky, James broad-shouldered with an easy laugh, Will barely older than 20 with freckles across his nose, Toby dark-haired and quiet, and Charlie with a gray-streaked beard that spoke of decades on the range. The meal passed pleasantly, with the men complimenting her cooking between discussions of ranch business. Harriet found herself relaxing, occasionally joining the conversation when directly addressed. After dinner, as the men drifted out to enjoy pipes or cigarettes on the porch, Flynn lingered. "That was the best meal I've had since leaving Virginia," he said. "You've made some very happy cowboys, Miss Zeller." "I'm glad," she replied, gathering plates. "Though I suspect after their own cooking anything might taste good." Flynn laughed, a rich sound that warmed the room. "Fair point. Still, you have a talent." He picked up a stack of plates. "Let me help with these." "You don't need to. My mother raised me to clean up after myself," he said, carrying the dishes to the wash basin. "Besides, I want to make sure you know you're valued here. This isn't just about cooking meals, it's about making Double Creek a home." Something in his words touched Harriet deeply. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin." "Flynn," he corrected. "Mr. Irwin was my father." "Then I'm Harriet," she replied, surprising herself with the informality. He nodded, his storm-gray eyes crinkling at the corners. "Harriet it is." The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Harriet rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent mornings baking bread or desserts, served lunch, and then had a few hours to herself before preparing dinner. The work was hard but satisfying, and the men's appreciation was evident in their clean plates and friendly banter. Flynn often found reasons to visit the cookhouse between meals, checking supplies, discussing menu options, or sometimes just sitting at the table with a cup of coffee while she worked. They talked easily about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and the daily happenings of the ranch. He never pried into her past, and she didn't ask about his, but the spaces between their conversations grew comfortable, filled with understanding rather than questions. 2 weeks after her arrival, Harriet was gathering eggs from the chicken coop when she heard raised voices from the corral. She walked toward the sound, curious. Flynn and Henry stood by the fence, watching as Will attempted to mount a spirited bay horse that clearly had other ideas. "He's too green for that stallion," Henry was saying. "Boy's gonna break his neck. He has to learn sometime," Flynn replied. "Stallion needs the exercise." The horse bucked suddenly, sending Will tumbling into the dust. The other ranch hands laughed good-naturedly as the young cowboy picked himself up. "Let James take him," Henry insisted. "He's got the experience." Flynn shook his head. "Will needs to work through this. He's got potential." Harriet approached the fence, fascinated by the training session and Flynn's evident patience as he called out advice to the frustrated young cowhand. "You're giving him too much rein," Flynn instructed. "He needs to feel your guidance. Confidence, not force." Will nodded, determination evident as he brushed dust from his clothes and approached the horse again. This time, he spoke softly to the animal, stroking its neck before mounting. The stallion pranced nervously but didn't buck. "That's it," Flynn encouraged. "Now show him who's in charge firmly but kindly." Harriet couldn't help herself. Like raising children, I imagine, they need boundaries and freedom in equal measure. The men turned, noticing her for the first time. Will's momentary distraction cost him, as the horse took advantage and sent him sprawling again. "Miss Zeller," Henry said, tipping his hat. "Didn't see you there." Flynn's expression was curious. "You have experience with children, Harriet." "Only theoretical," she admitted. "I've read extensively on child development. Dr. Holt's theories on nurturing independence while providing structure are particularly compelling." Flynn's eyebrows rose. "You've read Dr. Holt?" Heat crept into Harriet's cheeks. Yes. My father had an extensive library." "Interesting comparison, though," Flynn said thoughtfully. "I never considered horse breaking in those terms, but you're right. Too much freedom, they run wild. Too many constraints, they break in spirit." Henry shook his head. "Book learning about raising kids applied to horses." "Now I've heard everything." But his tone was good-natured. Will had remounted, and this time the stallion seemed to accept his authority, walking in a circle around the corral. "There you go," Flynn called. "Well done, Will." Harriet smiled at the young cowboy's evident pride. "I should get back to the kitchen. Those eggs won't cook themselves." As she turned to leave, Flynn fell into step beside her. "Your father must have been an unusual man to encourage a daughter's education so thoroughly." Harriet tensed, waiting for the familiar criticism that often followed such observations. "He was a professor. He believed knowledge should be available to everyone, regardless of gender." "Smart man," Flynn said simply. "The world needs more progressive thinkers." Harriet stopped walking, staring at him in surprise. "You don't think it inappropriate for women to pursue intellectual interests?" Flynn's expression was puzzled. "Why would I? Intelligence is a gift, not a burden. The more educated minds we have, men and women, the better off we all are." The simple statement, delivered without hesitation, struck Harriet with the force of revelation. How long had it been since someone, particularly a man, had treated her thoughts as valuable rather than dangerous? "That's refreshing," she managed. Flynn studied her face. "You've encountered different opinions, I take it." "You could say that." Harriet resumed walking, not ready to elaborate. Flynn didn't press, but as they reached the cookhouse, he said quietly, "With me, Harriet, you can always speak freely. I value honesty over pleasantries any day." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her composure. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and slipped inside to the safety of her kitchen. That night, lying in her bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Harriet replayed Flynn's words. "With me, you can always speak freely." Such a simple promise, yet so profound in its potential. The last time she'd spoken freely, sharing her opinions on women's suffrage at her sister's dinner party, She'd ended up in an asylum, labeled hysterical and delusional. Could Flynn truly be different? Or was this another trap? Another man waiting for her to reveal enough of her mind to condemn her, despite her fears? Harriet found herself drawn to Flynn's company. He sought her out regularly, bringing her wildflowers he found on the range or books from his personal library. They discussed everything from ranch management to literature, and he listened to her opinions with genuine interest. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Flynn invited her to join him on the porch of the main house after dinner. "The sunset is particularly fine tonight," he explained, "and I have something to show you." Curious, Harriet followed him. The porch faced west, offering a spectacular view of the Texas sky ablaze with orange, pink, and purple as the sun descended. Flynn gestured to a chair, then settled into the one beside it. "I received a letter from my cousin in Boston today," he said, pulling a folded newspaper from his pocket. "He knows of my interest in social progress and sent this article. I thought you might find it interesting." He handed her the clipping. It was a piece about Elizabeth Cady Stanton's recent speech advocating for women's right to vote. Harriet's hands trembled slightly as she read it. "This is not common reading material for a Texas rancher," she said carefully. Flynn's smile was wry. "I'm not a common Texas rancher. My mother was involved with the women's suffrage movement before her death. She raised me to believe in equality." Harriet couldn't hide her surprise. "And you're sharing this with me because I've noticed how carefully you guard your words sometimes." His gaze was direct but kind. "How you start to express an opinion, then stop yourself. I thought you might appreciate knowing that here, your thoughts won't be dismissed or ridiculed." The understanding in his eyes nearly broke her careful composure. How had he seen what she worked so hard to conceal? "It's not that simple," she said finally. "Having opinions, especially as a woman, can be dangerous." Flynn's expression darkened. "Has someone made you feel that way, Harriet?" The compassion in his voice unlocked something in her chest. Before she could reconsider, the words spilled out how her brother-in-law had committed her to the asylum after she'd challenged his management of her inheritance. How the doctors had diagnosed her with female hysteria and prescribed rest cures and isolation. How she'd endured weeks of being treated as if her mind were broken before her friend's husband had secured her release. "They said my education had overtaxed my feminine constitution," she concluded bitterly. "That reading had filled my head with dangerous ideas unsuited to a woman's natural capabilities." Flynn's hands had curled into fists during her recounting, his knuckles white with tension. "That's not medicine. That's control, pure and simple." "It's the way of the world," Harriet said, though the understanding in his eyes was like a balm to her wounded spirit. "Women who speak their minds are troublesome, unmarriageable, insane." "No," Flynn said firmly. "It's the way of small-minded men who fear what they don't understand. Your intelligence isn't a flaw, Harriet. It's a strength, one I've admired since the day we met." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. "You don't even know me. I know enough." His gaze held hers. "I know you're brave enough to travel alone across the country, smart enough to negotiate terms before accepting employment, kind enough to make this ranch feel like a home, and strong enough to survive what would break many people." Harriet looked away, overwhelmed by his assessment and the warmth it kindled inside her. "You give me too much credit. I don't think that's possible." Flynn leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Harriet, I want you to know that here with me, you never need to hide your thoughts or pretend to be less than you are. Your mind is a gift, not a liability." The simple acceptance in his words brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to appear weak when he had just praised her strength. "Thank you, Flynn. That means more than I can express." They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Harriet felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her burden had diminished its weight. "It's getting late," Flynn said eventually, rising from his chair. "May I walk you back to your cabin?" Harriet nodded, suddenly aware of how the night air had cooled. Flynn offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beside her as they walked across the yard. At her door, Flynn paused. "Thank you for trusting me with your story, Harriet. Your courage is remarkable." "Thank you for listening," she replied softly, "and for not thinking me broken." His smile was gentle in the moonlight. "The only broken things I see are the systems that tried to silence you. Good night, Harriet." "Good night, Flynn." Inside her cabin, Harriet sat on the edge of her bed, her mind replaying their conversation. For the first time since her ordeal, she felt truly seen, not as a problematic woman, not as damaged goods, but as a person worthy of respect and understanding. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The following weeks brought subtle changes to life at Double Creek. Flynn sought her company more frequently, often bringing her into discussions about ranch operations or sharing books from his library. The other men, following their boss's lead, began asking for her opinions on matters beyond the kitchen. Harriet blossomed under this newfound respect. She organized the cookhouse more efficiently, started a small herb garden behind the kitchen, and even began teaching young Will to read during evening hours after discovering he had never learned. One crisp October morning, Flynn knocked on her cabin door just after sunrise. "I need to ride the north boundary today," he said when she opened the door. "Thought you might like to come along. It's beautiful country and you've been cooped up on the ranch for months now." Harriet hesitated. "What about lunch for the men, already arranged with Henry?" "He's going to town with Charlie and the others are working the south pasture. They'll take cold provisions." He grinned. "So, what do you say? Care to see more of Double Creek than the yard and cookhouse?" The invitation was tempting. "I'm not much of a rider," she admitted. "Daisy's gentle as a lamb," Flynn assured her, "and we'll take it slow." An hour later they rode out from the ranch, Harriet perched somewhat nervously on a placid mare while Flynn led the way on his stallion. The morning air was cool and fresh, scented with sage and the promise of approaching winter. As they crested a hill overlooking the ranch, Harriet gasped at the vista spread before them, rolling grasslands dotted with mesquite trees, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through the property, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Flynn nodded, pride evident in his expression. "This land gets in your blood. Every season brings something new to love." They rode at a leisurely pace, Flynn pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. Harriet found herself relaxing, enjoying the rhythm of the horse beneath her and Flynn's easy company. At midday, they stopped in a small grove of cottonwoods by the creek. Flynn spread a blanket in the dappled shade and produced a lunch packed in saddlebags: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples. "This is lovely," Harriet said, settling on the blanket. "Thank you for bringing me." Flynn stretched out his long legs, leaning back against a tree trunk. "You've been working hard. Thought you deserved a day of beauty." The simple consideration touched her deeply. They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. "May I ask you something?" Harriet ventured finally. "Anything. Why did you really hire me that day in Colorado City? You didn't know me, had no idea if I could cook. It was unusual." Flynn considered her question seriously. "Honestly, I saw something in your eyes that I recognized: determination, pride, and underneath it all, a kind of desperate hope." He met her gaze. "I've been at the end of my rope before, needed someone to take a chance on me. Figured I could do the same for you." "Who took a chance on you?" Harriet asked, intrigued by this glimpse into his past. A shadow crossed his face. "My uncle. After the war I was lost, angry, had nightmares that would wake the dead, drank too much. Uncle Frank found me in a saloon in San Antonio, half dead from a bar fight, and dragged me back here. Said if I was determined to die, I could at least do some honest work first." Harriet couldn't imagine the confident, steady man before her in such a state. "What changed?" "This land," Flynn said simply. "The work, the responsibility. Uncle Frank had no children, and he needed an heir who cared about Double Creek as much as he did. He gave me purpose when I had none." His smile turned sad. "He died 3 years later, but by then I'd found my feet again." "I'm sorry about your uncle," Harriet said softly. "He sounds like a good man. The best." Flynn's gaze turned thoughtful. "What about your father? You mentioned he was a professor." Harriet nodded, a familiar ache filling her chest. "Classical literature at the university. He loved learning, loved sharing knowledge. Our home was filled with books and ideas. After my mother died when I was 12, he raised me and my sister alone." She smiled at the memory. "He used to say that conventional thinking was the refuge of uncurious minds." "Wise man," Flynn commented. "And your sister, Elizabeth, is conventional. She married well, does charity work, hosts dinner parties, everything a proper Philadelphia lady should be." Harriet plucked at a blade of grass. "She tried to stop Robert, her husband, from committing me, but in the end, she chose peace in her marriage over defending me." Flynn frowned. "That must have hurt." "It did, still does." Harriet sighed. "But I understand her choice in a way. She has 3 children to consider. Robert controls everything: the money, the household, her social standing." "That's not a marriage," Flynn said, his voice tight. "That's ownership." The vehemence in his tone surprised her. "It's how things are for many women." "It shouldn't be." Flynn's expression was fierce. "Marriage should be a partnership of equals. My parents had that: different strengths, different roles sometimes, but equal respect, equal say in decisions that affected them both." Harriet studied him, wondering at this unusual man who spoke of equality as if it were obvious rather than radical. "You're not what I expected when I came west." Flynn Irwin. His smile returned, warming his storm-gray eyes. "Is that good or bad?" "Decidedly good," she admitted, "though somewhat confusing." "How so?" Harriet hesitated, then decided to honor his request for honesty. "You treat me as an equal. You value my opinions even when they're unconventional. You encourage me to speak freely. It makes me wonder." "Wonder what?" he prompted when she trailed off. She met his gaze directly. "What you want from me." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been hurt. "Is it so hard to believe I simply enjoy your company, your conversation, that I respect you for who you are without ulterior motives?" Put that way, her suspicion seemed ungenerous. "I'm sorry. It's just men who have encouraged my outspokenness in the past often had reasons that became clear only later. My brother-in-law initially praised my intelligence until I questioned his management of my father's estate." Flynn's expression softened. "Harriet, I won't pretend I don't feel drawn to you as a person, as a woman, but my respect for your mind, for your right to express yourself freely, that stands separate from any personal feelings. It's simply the right way to treat another human being." The admission of attraction, casually included in his explanation, sent a flutter through Harriet's chest. She had been so focused on rebuilding her life, on proving she could survive independently, that she had pushed aside any awareness of Flynn as more than an employer and friend. Now, with his words hanging in the air between them, she could no longer ignore the warmth that spread through her whenever he was near. "I feel drawn to you too," she confessed quietly. "But I'm afraid. Not of you," she hastened to add when his brow furrowed, "but of losing myself again. Of trusting wrongly." Flynn nodded, his expression grave. "I understand, and I won't rush you or pressure you. Whatever grows between us, friendship, more than friendship, it should develop naturally, with mutual respect and trust." His patience, his willingness to give her time and space, only increased Harriet's growing affection. "Thank you, Flynn." He smiled and began packing up their lunch things. "We should head back, still have the north boundary to check before dark." The ride back was filled with lighter conversation: Flynn's plans for expanding the herd, Harriet's ideas for the coming winter months at the ranch, books they had both enjoyed. By the time they returned to Double Creek, Harriet's cheeks were flushed with fresh air and something very like happiness. As Flynn helped her down from Daisy in the ranch yard, his hands strong and steady at her waist, Harriet found herself reluctant to end their day together. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. The ride, the conversation, the—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "The freedom." Flynn's hands lingered at her waist, his eyes serious as they met hers. "You deserve nothing less, Harriet Zeller." For a breathless moment she thought he might kiss her. Part of her hoped he would, but he stepped back respectfully, releasing her. "I should see to the horses," he said. "Will you be all right preparing dinner?" Harriet nodded, oddly disappointed yet relieved at the same time. "Of course. I'll see you at 6. As autumn deepened toward winter, something else deepened at Double Creek Ranch: the connection between Harriet and Flynn. They didn't speak again directly of attraction or feelings, but their friendship grew more intimate in 100 small ways. Flynn began joining Harriet in the kitchen in the evenings, helping wash dishes while they talked. She found herself seeking his company during her free hours, sometimes just sitting together on the porch, watching the changing landscape in comfortable silence. The ranch hands noticed, of course. Harriet occasionally caught knowing glances between them when Flynn brought her wildflowers or lingered after meals. But there was no mockery in their observations, only a kind of collective approval. "Boss seems happier these days," Henry commented one morning as he helped Harriet carry supplies from the storage shed to the cookhouse. "More settled." Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Henry's weathered face creased in a smile. "Sure you don't." He set down the sack of potatoes he'd been carrying. "Look, Miss Zeller, I've known Flynn Irwin for 5 years. Seen him through hard times and good. Never seen him like this, planning for the future, humming when he works, smiling for no reason." Harriet busied herself arranging jars on a shelf. "The ranch is doing well. That would make any man content." "It's not the ranch that's got him building that addition onto the main house," Henry said dryly. "Or ordering those fancy curtains from the catalog." This was news to Harriet. "What addition?" Henry looked chagrined. "Shouldn't have said anything. He wanted it to be a surprise." He picked up another sack. "Just know that man thinks the world of you, Miss Zeller, and from what I can see, it's mutual." Harriet didn't confirm or deny it, but that night she watched Flynn more carefully during dinner, noting the way his eyes sought hers across the table, the gentle consideration in his voice when he spoke to her. Was Henry right? Was Flynn making plans that included her in a more permanent way? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. After dinner, when the other men had gone to the bunkhouse and Flynn was helping her clear the table, Harriet found the courage to broach the subject. "Henry mentioned you're adding onto the main house," she said casually. Flynn paused, a stack of plates in his hands. Did he?" He seemed to think it was meant to be a surprise. A rueful smile curved Flynn's mouth. "It was. I should know better than to think anything stays secret for long on a ranch." He set the plates down and turned to face her. "Yes, I'm adding some rooms. The house was built for a family, but the upstairs is unfinished. I've finally gotten around to completing what my uncle started." "I see," Harriet said, though she wasn't sure she did. "And the curtains." Flynn's cheeks colored slightly. "A house needs proper furnishings. The place has been a bachelor's quarters for too long." Harriet nodded, uncertain how to interpret his explanations. Was Henry right about Flynn's intentions, or was she reading too much into simple home improvements? Flynn stepped closer, his expression suddenly serious. "Harriet, I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, Christmas is coming in a few weeks. I'd like to host a proper celebration here at the ranch, dinner, decorations, gifts for the men. Would you help me plan it?" It wasn't the question she'd half expected, but the idea charmed her nonetheless. "I'd love to. It's been years since I've celebrated properly." Flynn's smile was warm. "Then it's settled. We'll give Double Creek its first real Christmas." The project gave them new reasons to spend time together, planning menus and decorations, discussing which of the men might appreciate what gifts. Flynn rode to Colorado City and returned with pine boughs, ribbon, candles, and a small box of glass ornaments ordered specially from back east. Together, they transformed the main house, draping pine garlands along the staircase, hanging wreaths in the windows, and setting candles on every available surface. The scent of pine filled the rooms, mingling with the aroma of gingerbread and cinnamon that wafted from the cookhouse, where Harriet spent hours preparing special treats. 3 days before Christmas, a cold front swept down from the north, bringing with it the rare gift of snow to West Texas. The ranch hands were like children, throwing snowballs and attempting to build lopsided snowmen before returning to their duties. That evening, after dinner, Flynn asked Harriet to join him for a walk. "It'll be cold," he warned, "but the moonlight on the snow is something special." Harriet wrapped herself in her warmest shawl, and Flynn added his own coat around her shoulders before they stepped out into the crystalline night. The world had been transformed, every familiar shape softened and brightened by the blanket of white. Their boots crunched in the fresh snow as Flynn led her toward the creek, now partially frozen, its banks draped in delicate ice formations. "It's magical," Harriet breathed, her words forming white puffs in the cold air. Flynn nodded, his face silvered by moonlight. "I've always loved snow. Makes everything new again, covers all the rough edges." They stopped by a large cottonwood, its branches etched in frost. Flynn turned to face her, his expression suddenly intent. "Harriet, there's something I need to tell you, ask you." Her heart began to race, and not from the cold. "Yes. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've brought warmth and light to this place, made it truly feel like home." He took a deep breath. "I know it hasn't been long, and maybe this is too soon, but life out here teaches you not to waste time when you know what you want." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Harriet's breath caught. "I love you, Harriet Zeller. Your strength, your intelligence, your kind heart. I love how you stand up for what you believe, how you never give up, how you see the good in people." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I want to build a life with you, equal partners, sharing everything, the good days, the hard times, all of it. Will you marry me?" Harriet stared at the ring, then at Flynn's hopeful face. Emotions cascaded through her: joy, fear, hope, doubt. "You don't have to answer right away," Flynn added quickly. "I know it's sudden. I know you may need time to be sure that—" "Yes," Harriet interrupted, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, I'll marry you, Flynn." His face lit with such happiness that any lingering doubts vanished. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, then pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that warmed her from head to toe despite the frigid air. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing quickly, Flynn pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise you, Harriet, I will spend every day making sure you never regret this decision. You will always be free to speak your mind, to be exactly who you are." "I know," she whispered, and realized she truly did know. Flynn had proven his respect for her mind, her independence, and her strength every day since they'd met. With him, she would never have to hide her thoughts or diminish herself to keep the peace. "That's why I love you." They returned to the ranch hand in hand, snowflakes beginning to fall again around them, coating their hair and shoulders with diamond dust. At the porch of the main house, Flynn paused. "Stay with me a while longer. I have something else to show you." Curious, Harriet followed him inside and up the stairs she'd helped decorate but never climbed. At the top was a hallway with several doors. Flynn led her to one at the end and opened it with a flourish. "This is what Henry wasn't supposed to mention." Harriet stepped into a beautiful bedroom, larger than she'd imagined. A four-poster bed stood against one wall, draped with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and cream. A dressing table with a mirror sat in one corner, a wardrobe in another. But what caught her attention most was the wall of empty bookshelves and the cozy reading nook set into the bay window, complete with cushioned window seat. "It's for your books," Flynn explained, watching her face. "I thought we could fill the shelves together." "And this," he led her through a connecting door, "is the study, for both of us." The adjoining room contained a large desk, more bookshelves, and two comfortable chairs arranged before a small fireplace. "Flynn, this is—" Harriet was speechless, overwhelmed by the thought and care evident in every detail. "Too much?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Perfect," she corrected, turning to embrace him. "Absolutely perfect." He held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "I want you to have space for all the parts of yourself, not just as my wife, not just as the ranch's cook, but as Harriet, the thinker, the reader, the woman with opinions worth hearing." Tears pricked Harriet's eyes at his understanding. "How did I get so lucky finding you?" Flynn kissed her forehead. "I ask myself the same question every day." Christmas at Double Creek was everything Harriet had hoped. The ranch hands exclaimed over their gifts: new gloves for Charlie, books for Will, a fine pocket watch for Henry. Flynn presented each man with a bonus, thanking them for their hard work through the year. Harriet had knitted Flynn a scarf in soft gray wool that matched his eyes, and baked his favorite pecan pie. But her real gift came that evening after the celebrations, when she showed him the letter she'd written to her sister. "I've invited her to our wedding," she explained. "I don't know if she'll come or even respond, but I wanted to try. She's my only family." Flynn squeezed her hand. "That's brave of you. You've taught me that speaking up, reaching out, is worth the risk." Harriet leaned against his solid warmth. "Even if she doesn't come, I'll know I tried." They were married on a clear, cold day in February 1876, in the parlor of the main house at Double Creek Ranch. The local minister rode out from Colorado City, along with a few townsfolk who had come to know and respect Flynn over the years. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, awkward but proud in their Sunday best. To Harriet's astonishment and joy, Elizabeth had responded to her letter with one of her own, tear-stained and apologetic. She couldn't attend, Robert would never allow it, but she sent her love and a family heirloom, their mother's lace handkerchief, to carry on her wedding day. Harriet carried it, along with a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers, as she walked down the stairs to where Flynn waited, his face alight with love. She wore a new dress of deep blue silk, ordered from the same catalog that had provided the curtains for their bedroom. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the words of commitment exchanged with clear voices and sure hearts. When Flynn kissed her as his wife for the first time, the cheers from the assembled guests nearly raised the roof. The celebration continued well into the night, with feasting, music from Charlie's fiddle, and even dancing. As darkness fell, Flynn led his bride upstairs to the rooms he had prepared with such care. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said, closing the door behind them. "I've been home since the moment you told me I could speak freely," Harriet replied, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Everything since then has just been confirming what I already knew." Flynn's arms encircled her waist, drawing her close. "And what was that?" "That with you, I can be fully myself. And that's all I've ever wanted." His kiss was tender, then deepening with passion as they began their life together as true partners, equal in love and respect. Spring came early to Double Creek that year, bringing new calves, wildflowers, and the news that Harriet was expecting their first child. Flynn's joy was boundless, his care for her during the pregnancy both touching and occasionally amusing in its intensity. "I'm perfectly capable of lifting a pot of beans," Harriet protested one evening as Flynn intercepted her in the kitchen. She had continued cooking for the ranch, though Flynn had suggested hiring help. "Not while carrying my son," Flynn countered, easily transferring the heavy pot to the table. "Or daughter," Harriet reminded him, "and I'm only 4 months along. Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time." Flynn's expression turned serious. "I know, but you don't have to do everything yourself. Letting people help isn't surrendering your independence, it's accepting that you're valued." The distinction struck Harriet forcefully. Throughout her life, she had equated needing help with weakness, with the very dependence that men like her brother-in-law had used to control the women around them. But Flynn's assistance came without strings, without expectation of subservience in return. "You're right," she acknowledged, surprising them both. "Thank you." Flynn's smile was warm. "Besides, I have ulterior motives. The sooner dinner's on the table, the sooner I can have you to myself." Their evenings together had become a cherished ritual, reading aloud to each other in their study, discussing the day's events, planning for the future. Flynn shared the ranch's management with her completely, seeking her input on decisions and teaching her the business side of cattle ranching. In turn, Harriet brought her organizational skills and fresh perspectives to their partnership. As her pregnancy progressed, they transformed one of the upstairs rooms into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and assembling a cradle that Flynn crafted himself, working late into the night after his ranch duties were complete. "It's beautiful," Harriet said, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the finished cradle. "Our child will be surrounded by so much love." "And freedom," Flynn added, placing his hand over hers. "Freedom to think, to question, to become whoever they're meant to be." In September of 1876, after a long but uncomplicated labor attended by the midwife from Colorado City, Harriet gave birth to a son. They named him Franklin Thomas Irwin Franklin after Flynn's uncle, Thomas after Harriet's father. "He has your eyes," Flynn murmured, cradling the infant with careful hands, "and hopefully your intelligence." "With your kindness and strength," Harriet added, exhausted but radiant with happiness. "He'll be a good man like his father." Flynn pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And he'll respect women who speak their minds, like his mother." Life settled into new rhythms around little Franklin's needs. Harriet found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated. Flynn proved to be an involved father, never considering childcare to be solely a woman's domain. He would often carry Franklin in a sling across his chest while performing his less dangerous ranch duties, or take him for walks in the evening to give Harriet time to read or write in her journal. By Franklin's first birthday, Double Creek Ranch had expanded, adding more grazing land and increasing the herd. Flynn's progressive ranching methods had drawn positive attention, and neighboring ranchers began to seek his advice. Harriet, too, found her voice beyond the boundaries of their home, writing occasional pieces for the Colorado City newspaper on topics ranging from household management to more controversial subjects like education for women. "The editor says my last article received more letters than anything they've published in years," she told Flynn one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Franklin played with wooden blocks at their feet. "All outraged, I assume," Flynn teased. "Not all," Harriet replied, smiling. "Some women wrote to thank me for articulating what they've thought but couldn't say." Flynn took her hand, his expression turning serious. "That's important work, Harriet, giving voice to those who have been silenced. I'm proud of you." "I couldn't do it without your support," she admitted. "Knowing you're beside me, believing in me, it makes me brave." "You were always brave," Flynn corrected. "You just needed someone who could see it." As Franklin grew from baby to toddler to an energetic little boy, the family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Elizabeth Mary, named for Harriet's sister and Flynn's mother. Where Franklin was thoughtful and quiet like Harriet, little Lizzie was bold and adventurous, constantly testing boundaries and asking why about everything she encountered. "She reminds me of you," Harriet commented to Flynn one day as they watched 4-year-old Lizzie attempt to climb a tree in the yard, undeterred by previous falls. Flynn laughed. "I was thinking she's just like her mother, determined to conquer every challenge, no matter what anyone says is proper for a girl." By 1885, Double Creek had become one of the most prosperous ranches in the county. The main house had expanded again to accommodate not only their growing family, which now included a third child, James, but also a steady stream of visitors, neighboring ranchers, business associates, and occasionally, travelers passing through with interesting stories and new ideas from distant places. Harriet had established a small school on the ranch, initially just for their children, but eventually including those of the married ranch hands and even some from nearby farms. Her innovative teaching methods and insistence that girls receive the same education as boys raised eyebrows. But the results spoke for themselves when her pupils consistently outperformed those from the town school. Flynn supported her educational endeavors wholeheartedly, even building a proper schoolhouse when the class outgrew the room they'd been using in the main house. "Learning is the greatest gift we can give the next generation," he said at the small ceremony to open the new building. "And no one has the right to limit who receives that gift based on gender or circumstance." On a warm evening in the spring of 1890, Harriet and Flynn sat on the same porch where they had spent so many hours together over the years. Now in their 40s, both showed signs of the passing time. Flynn's hair touched with silver at the temples, fine lines around Harriet's eyes that deepened when she smiled. Their children were growing up quickly. Franklin, at 13, already showing interest in both ranching and books. Lizzie, 11, fiercely intelligent and outspoken, and James, 8, quiet but observant with a gift for understanding animals that promised to make him an exceptional rancher. "I had a letter from Elizabeth today," Harriet said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Robert passed away last month." Flynn's expression was measured. "How is she handling it?" "Better than expected. She says she feels free." Harriet met her husband's gaze. "She's asked if she might visit us once the mourning period is observed. She wants to meet her nieces and nephew." "Of course she should come," Flynn replied without hesitation. "She's family." Harriet nodded, grateful for his understanding. I've been thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't offered me that job 15 years ago. If you hadn't told me I could speak freely with you. Flynn took her hand, his thumb tracing the wedding band he'd placed there so many years before. I'd have found you somehow. Some things are meant to be. Do you really believe that? I do. His smile was tender. But I'm glad I didn't have to search too hard. You're worth waiting for, Harriet Zeller Irwin, but I'm grateful for every day I haven't had to wait. Harriet leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as their children played in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening air. Franklin was reading to his siblings, his voice animated as he shared some adventure story that had them captivated. "We did well, didn't we?" she murmured. "We did," Flynn agreed, "but we're not finished yet, not by a long shot." And he was right. In the years that followed, Double Creek Ranch continued to thrive under their joint stewardship. Their children grew into adults who carried forward their parents' values. Franklin eventually taking over the ranch operations while pursuing a law degree. Lizzie becoming one of the first female doctors in West Texas. James establishing a horse breeding program renowned throughout the state. Harriet's articles evolved into a book about her experiences, published in 1895 to both controversy and acclaim. Labeled insane, A Woman's Journey to Freedom became an important voice in the ongoing struggle for women's rights. Its frank discussion of the medical establishment's mistreatment of women opening many eyes to institutionalized injustice. Flynn's pride in her accomplishments never wavered. "You're changing minds," he told her as they read yet another positive review. "Slowly, perhaps, but surely." "We're changing minds," Harriet corrected. "Everything I've accomplished has been possible because of what we built together." As they entered their golden years, with grandchildren playing around their feet and the 20th century dawning with its promises of progress and change, Harriet often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this life of fulfillment and purpose. From the desperate young woman stepping off a stagecoach with nowhere to go, to the respected author, educator, and ranch mistress, she had become all because one man had seen her value and given her the space to claim it. "What are you thinking about?" Flynn asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset in the same spot where he had proposed so many years ago. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," Harriet replied, her hand finding his as it always did. "If I hadn't been labeled insane for speaking my mind, I might never have come west, never found you." Flynn's eyes, still that same storm gray though now surrounded by deep creases, held the same warmth they always had when he looked at her. "And I would have spent my life knowing something was missing, but never understanding what." "With me, you can speak freely," Harriet quoted, the words as meaningful now as they had been when first spoken. "You gave me that gift when I needed it most. And you gave me a family, a purpose, a partner I could trust with everything," Flynn countered. "I'd say we're even." Harriet smiled, leaning into the solid strength of the man who had helped her rebuild her life from the ashes of despair. "More than even. We're exactly as we should be." As darkness fell and stars appeared above Double Creek Ranch, they remained together on the porch, hands entwined, hearts still beating in unison after all these years, living proof that true love begins not with control or conformity, but with the freedom to be fully, authentically oneself.